Oh, dang, who are you?
What's the tea, sis? Dudes that live here are out chucking tea in the freaking ocean.
No
dude.
way.
Yeah, they're just taking the tea and in the ocean.
Ew, gross!
Colonial Britain?
Right. So the Boston Tea Party. The circumstances that led up to the Boston Tea Party were set in motion 150 years prior to the event. In 1620, a group of 100 pilgrims set sail from Great Britain to what we now know as the United States of America, where I live and you might too. Back then, though, it was just the New World, as it was undiscovered. We know that there were Native Americans living here. It just wasn't well known outside of this continent. So 100 settlers set sail. They were called the Pilgrims. And among them were kind of this disparate group of religious separatists, of business people, and others, just all trying to make it to a new world where they could have a new life, free from religious persecution, and also with the possibility of new business deals and new just approaches to the world. So these 100 settlers quickly started to settle in and assimilate into their first colony, which they called Plymouth Rock, or it was in Plymouth, Massachusetts. By 1773, this population had grown to over 2 million people as a result of immigration. These colonists developed a new identity. They were spread out over 13 colonies on the easternmost coast of the United States, and this new identity that they developed was really strange to them because they were no longer British in culture. They were something different entirely. They hadn't either managed to integrate or assimilate with the Native Americans, whose land they encroached on, and they weren't so solidly in their identity as we are today as Americans. They were something new, something nascent, and they didn't quite know what they were. This uniquely American culture had created a new set of values and needs, more indicative of the people that lived in the colonies at the time than of anyone from the British mainland. As such, the laws and regulations that had applied to colonists for all these years no longer held firm to who they were and what they needed as a population. As their wants and needs were no longer heard, the colonists started to grow in dissent and discomfort, and they started to let that opinion be known. One of the breaking points for colonists was excessive taxation. Taxes typically are levied by governments against its citizens to provide communal services for them, right? We pay taxes so that we can have paved roads, access to clean water, etc., etc., etc. We fund public need and projects with it. The money comes back to us. Well, the same can't be said for colonial Americans. That they were used to line the British East India Company's pockets, which was a huge tea company exporter, exploited multiple countries, including the ones that my ancestors came from. And also, these taxes went to the crown and to help better the lives of mainland Britishers. Okay, well, that's great. But they didn't feel that they saw any of the money back for themselves and to improve their quality of life. So they petitioned for representation. They said, we no longer are represented by you in Parliament. We no longer align with your values. Therefore, we would like to have our own representation, and we would like to be able to, at least in some capacity, either self-govern or influence the way things are run. This didn't quite go so well. You see, this kind of gave birth to a movement that is popularly known as no taxation without representation. If you've studied U.S. history or are somewhat aware of the beginnings of this country, you might have heard of that phrase, taxation without representation. That's what was happening to the U.S. colonists. They were being taxed heavily, but not receiving any of the perks that came with it. It felt like economic subjugation and fiscal abuse, which might sound like big wordy ways of putting abuse of their money. This all contributed to a rising sentiment amongst colonists that they were no longer British. They were Americans. They were their own thing, and that they should be their own thing. Not so good for the crown, as it would turn out. This resentment would come to a head in the Revolutionary War, but it started to simmer and bubble up and led to what is now known as the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party occurred in 1773 when a group of frustrated and angry settlers banded together to make a statement. The reason it's called the Boston Tea Party is because it ended with the Boston harbor being flooded with boxes of tea, all from the British East India Company. This was largely in response to the Tea Act, a move considered despotic by many, and an offshoot or reinforcement of the very controversial and highly angering Townshend Act. The Townshend Act was a series of laws and regulations introduced in that era that were meant to further subjugate the colonists and establish British superiority and supremacy over them. They had the objective of increasing the salaries of crown-backed officials and governors so that they would stay loyal to the crown and feel no need to defect to this wildly rambunctious, angry population. Also wanted to gain operating costs for British East India Company, an exporter and importer of teas and other exotic goods. And finally, like I said, they really just wanted to say, hey, we're the boss. Legally and fiscally, we own you. And don't forget that. Tightening reins and The tightening reins and increasing desire for freedom from Britain led the colonists to really just come up in arms and protest, even getting into armed revolts and violent uprisings. These would typically end in violent quelling of the conflict, in incidents like the Boston Massacre and others, where British soldiers put down any sort of dissent at any cost necessary. Now, the danger of this Tea Act is it allowed the British East India Company, which enjoyed lots of state benefits, a nice little tax break, which made their tea cheaper than any other tea, and effectively gave them a huge monopoly on a widely consumed and popular substance. Any tea from, imported by the Dutch or anyone else was considered illegal and smuggled. An organization called the Sons of Liberty, intermittently known as the Whigs, were, yes, Whigs, really opposed this Tea Act and this monopoly. And so they said, we're not going to let you land. We're not going to let you bring your tea. Because there was this shipment coming of 600,000 pounds of tea. 600,000 pounds of tea, all set to come to the U.S. and all set to be sold in U.S. markets and undercutting the price of any other tea. These people swarmed the meeting house, and Samuel Adams at the time, who was a big figure in Boston, tried to take control of the situation and eliminate all of this discourse and say, hey, let's go about this rationally. But he could not control the crowds, and they poured out of the meeting hall, and there were a lot of people. Thousands of people had congregated there. They poured out of the meeting hall. Some of these people donned very elaborate Native American disguises and attempted to kind of pin this on the Native Americans, because what they were about to do next was very illegal. A group of 130 men poured in onto the boats or ships and proceeded to dump out 342 chests of tea. Tea flooded into the harbor, and it became like one big teapot, except not really. Don't drink salt water. But it became flooded with tea. Now, a fourth vessel containing more tea had run aground earlier and sold much of its tea in private shops. Upon noticing that, a bunch of men ran into the shops and stole the tea. And they dumped that into the harbor too, because why not? It was an incredibly coordinated, violent reaction on Americans' parts, and it was kind of considered one of the huge reactions that was the precursor to the Revolutionary War. Now, following this, drinking tea was considered unpatriotic amongst true Americans, and that's why coffee is so popular in our country, apparently. Isn't that crazy? Between 1775 and 1778, the British government would pass two more kind of acts or aimed at conciliatory action, or bringing the two groups back together, but they failed. And as luck would have it, the Americans liberated themselves. So yeah, next time you hear taxation without representation, you know what that means, and you know why it sucks to not be represented in government. So yeah, I mean, I guess this also ends with me imploring you, if you are of age, please vote. You know, it's our civic duty to ensure we have representation. Our forefathers fought really hard for that, and this country was founded on the idea that you deserve to be represented in your government, and you deserve to be a part of everything that's happening. So please vote, please be an active member of your society, and please, 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 stay up to date and educated on what's happening. No one can take your freedom away if you concentrate and study on what's going on and keep up to date. With that though, after you've checked out the voter registration preferably, we're gonna have a little section where we eat. You thought I forgot, didn't you? You thought I forgot about our little snacks, our little munchies? Not today. We will be having tea as it was consumed in colonial Britain. Colonial Britain? In colonial Boston. We will be enjoying tea as it was made in colonial Boston. Why do I eat it like this? Unhinged. In a new location, and we're gonna be having, you guessed it, tea. The same way that the colonial Bostonites would have. So at the time, it was reported that in Boston, they frequently took their tea both at tea time and with breakfast. And if had at breakfast, tea would have basically been just with a piece of toast that had been, you know, toasted on a buttered surface. And if had just like regularly at tea time, they would have just had it plain. The most distinguishing factor that I could tell from colonial tea time as opposed to British tea time is that they didn't use cream or sugar or any sort of accoutrement in their tea. It was just straight up. So I have here some just regular black tea. I use this Twinings English Breakfast 100% pure black tea blend. And I just, you know, put that with some warm to hot water, made a nice little cup of tea. I also wanted to show you guys this because I wasn't sure if I would be able to get the English tea here. So I brought my own favorite black tea from home. This one it's a tea for wisdom. It's really nice to have before like a morning meditation. It's blackberry sage black tea. Definitely not what the British colonists were having, but it's, you know, it's good. So yeah, I recommend this for a more modern take on colonial tea, blackberry sage tea. And then I have a piece of kind of sad looking buttered toast that was toasted like on a buttered pan. Again, this is gluten-free toast because I have celiac disease. Yeah, I'm gonna take a bite of it. Not bad. Okay. It's taking me a while to chew. I'm gonna wash it down with my tea. A little off topic, but a quick statement. I recently switched gluten-free breads from Canyon Bakehouse. If anyone has any recommendations for like gluten-free bread, this kind is absolutely fine. As you can see, it's kind of floppy, lacks structural integrity. If anyone has any recommendations and you come across this and you happen to be familiar with gluten-free bread and you like the one that you currently are eating, please leave a comment. Yeah, I'm looking to switch. So yeah, I mean, all in all, this is a breakfast I would eat in high school. Cup of tea and a piece of toast. I wasn't gluten-free at the time, so it would have just been like Oro wheat or like multi-grain loaf. But this is something I would have eaten. My one thing is, obviously, it would have probably been chai, because that's like, you know, my grandpa makes really good chai, my mom makes really good chai. I don't really, and if I were to drink tea straight up, I either would have like an herbal tea like this that's got like some fruit or something blended into it, or my favorite, ultimate favorite, like straight up just tea leaf style tea is jasmine green tea. If you've never had that, you should try it out. It's a pretty basic tea and it tastes really good.